What's doing? Hope everybody's all right. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you like. I hope you share. I hope you subscribe. I am on a mission to get all my subscribers to ask one of your friends to subscribe. If I could get all my subscribers to do that, I will double the amount of subscribers I have. So help me out if you really enjoy the channel. A lot of people ask me about some high profile prisoners that I did time with. I'll get into some of them. There's a lot more than I could get into right now in this video. There's also some people I don't want to bring up, to protect them, whatever it may be. But I'll get right into some guys. I made a video the other day about Donald Nash, who they called the CBS killer. He killed three CBS technicians, and he killed two other women that he was hired to kill. It became a high-profile case. So I told you a story about Donald Nash, and a lot of people asked me who else I was with, so I'll get into a few of those cases. We'll get right into one of them. Was Richie Robles. I was with Richie Robles. Richie Robles was not someone that I hung out with. He was not someone that I broke bread with. But I did have many conversations with Richie Robles. We were in Attica together. We were in the same company together. And Richie Robles was responsible for what was called the career girls murder in the 1960s. When I met Richie, he had like 40 years in prison, maybe more than that. He ended up doing a total of 51 years in prison. But Richie Robles became a very high-profile case in the 1960s. And what had happened was two girls were brutally murdered. And New York City detectives actually arrested the wrong guy for it. They arrested a 19-year-old guy named George Whitmore. And George Whitmore had a very low IQ. So low that he was close to like being mentally challenged. And the officers fabricated the confession. The officers wrote a 61-page confession, and they got George Whitmore to sign it. And they convicted him and put him in prison. They almost gave him the death penalty, but the death penalty came off of the table. And some people that were investigating this realized that in the confession was information that, or the police knew all the information that was in the confession. And so they were able to determine that the police wrote this confession, and they got George Whitmore out of prison. And another individual years later was arrested for some crimes, and in a deal, he snitched out Richie Robles. And they ended up arresting Richie Robles in 1965. And what he did was he killed two girls. One girl was Emily Hoffett, and the other girl's name was Janice Wiles. And they were from a prominent family, these two girls. They lived in a wealthy neighborhood in Manhattan. And Richie Robles was like a drug addict, a teenager. I believe he was a teenager, might have been in his 20s. I'm not sure. And he climbed into the third floor window and he mutilated these girls really bad. Like he disemboweled one of the girls, took her intestines out, and the other girl he decapitated, and he stabbed them over 100 times. When they found the girls, they were duct taped together in the building, and they ended up finding Richie Robles. And the only reason they didn't give him the death penalty was because they had just changed the law that the death penalty was for cop killers and for certain crimes, but Richie's crime didn't fall under it. And so he ended up pleading guilty, I believe, to 25 to life. He just pled guilty to 25 to life for this brutal murder. And so I met Richie in Attica. Richie was an amazing artist, He used to sell his pictures for thousands of dollars. I believe he used to send them to a sister he had, or someone in society, and they used to sell his paintings for him. He was so good that the officers would bring pictures of their wedding, and Richie would paint on the easel the big oil to canvas, like big, huge oil on canvas paintings, and the officers would purchase the work off him. Richie was a very, very talented artist. He was very quiet. He stayed to himself. He was an older gentleman. He had 20-something years on me. And but I would have some conversations with him there. And like I said, he did 40-something years. I remember the father of those two girls reading. The father of the two girls ended up committing suicide as well. He couldn't take what had happened, and he ended up committing suicide. Richie was released from prison in 2020. They let him go, which is so phenomenal when you look at the way the parole board works, that who they would release and who they won't release. It was because the system really centers around a revolving door and money, and it's just. But they released Richie in 2020, 5 years ago, and so he was a high profile case that I was there with. I was there with Tom Torpy. Tom Torpy was a gangster out of Rochester, New York. Loved Torpy. Broke a lot of bread with Torpy. Ate dinner with him. Ate lunch with him all the time. Would sit at the table with him and just talk every day for hours. He was one of my buddies in there. He was a bodyguard for a mob boss up in Rochester. He had a big stronghold up there. He controlled a lot of the adult entertainment and the social clubs and titty bars and stuff like that. Torpy had a big hold up there, and Torpy ended up. They accused him of hiring a hitman to kill someone, and found him guilty of murder, I believe. I don't remember the exact things with Torpy's case. Not important to get into, but I was up there with Torpy, who was a high profile case. Torpy ended up getting released in 2009. I believe 2009. Yeah, he passed away out there too at like age 73, complications from a fall. But Torpy was a good dude, and he had a big case. I was up there with him. I was up there with Doc. Doc was the chiropractor who, I believe, he caught his wife. He was an Indian man. I was on the same company with Doc too. I used to talk to Doc. I had pulled my lower back working out in the weights. And because he was a chiropractor, I went to him and he showed me a bunch of stretches I should do to relieve the tension in my back. Very, very quiet man, Indian guy, big guy, glasses. I heard he caught his wife cheating on him. I'm not sure if that was the specifics, but he ended up cutting her heart out and then chopping her body up in a bunch of pieces and putting her in the freezer. And he ended up getting caught. I think she was in the freezer for months too. And Doc ended up getting 25 to life for that. He was a big media case, especially because he was a doctor. I was in Attica with Mark David Chapman, the guy that killed John Lennon. But I didn't have exposure to him. I never had a conversation with Chapman. Chapman was kept in an area that was segregated from the population to protect him. And he was up in Attica about 20, 25 years until I believe they moved him somewhere else. I saw his face a few times. I got to see Chapman moving around a few times. They would never take him anywhere without a police escort. He was not well liked by the officers. He was not well liked by the prison population. A very arrogant man, known to be a very arrogant man. And so he was up there. Chapman was up there. I was up there with Terrence Laso. Terrence Laso was Terrence Laso was one of the first guys I met when I got to Sing Sing prison. He was found guilty of killing the publisher of Reader's Digest when he was 17 years old. He was in a detention center called Lincoln Hall as a juvenile, and he left the detention center. He broke out. He snuck out with one of his friends, and they went to go break into a house, and they didn't think anyone was home in the house. So he picked up like a big fire log, just in case there was a dog in the house or something like that. But a woman surprised him, an older woman surprised him, and he ended up beating her with the fire log and killing her. And also, I believe, beat her husband, who was like an invalid who was in the house. They sentenced him to 33 1/3 to life, Terry. And he served like 27 years or something like that. He ended up going down on an appeal and getting a few years off of his sentence, but he still served like 27 years. And Terry made it out too, and I have to say something about Terry. Even though the crime was pretty bad crime, Terry was a 17-year-old kid when he committed that crime. And even when I met him, he had his wits about him. He had become a man, and he had changed his life. Terry was one of the guys who really changed himself and matured and regretted what he had done as a kid, and I believe drugs were involved too. He was under the influence of drugs when it happened, but Terry turned into a good man, and he ended up getting released as well. I was there with Fat Frankie. Fat Frankie was the best. Fat Frankie was awesome. He was a gangster with the Lucchese crime family. Fat Frankie. We were in Sing Sing together, and he did a hit on a guy named Fat Pete Chota. Fat Pete Chota was a gangster who did something wrong, and they told Fat Frankie to take out Fat Pete, and he shot Fat Pete about 10 times, and Fat Pete lived to testify against him. And Frankie and I got along good. We ate together a lot too. We told a lot of stories. I told the story about when I brought Fat Frankie to the handball court. He hit the ball so hard his false teeth flew out and was skidding across the court. He says, "I told you I didn't want to play the game. I'm too old for this shit." I said, "Frankie, come on. I need a handball player, man. Come on, please." He goes, "I'm too old." I said, "Come on, Frankie, please. All you got to do is put the ball on the wall." He swung so hard, I saw something shooting across the floor. It was his false teeth. He swung so hard, his teeth flew out. Fucking Fat Frankie, man. He used to tell me the craziest stories. He told me some real crazy stories that I'll never forget. I had a friend come visit me in prison, and who owned a mortgage company, and a couple of guys showed up to extort him, and he came to visit me, and he was telling me that. And when I went back into the prison, I brought it up to Fat Frankie just in conversation. Frankie said, "Give me the phone number. I'll take care of it." And Frankie made one phone call. Those guys never went near my friend again. He had a lot of juice, even in prison. It was crazy. And he had a lot of scams going on, even when he was in prison. This guy was making tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars while he was in prison. While I was there with him, he finished his state time. He had only 10 years in the state for attempted murder. And then he had to go over to the feds. And while I was in Sing Sing with him, he finished his state time. And the feds came and picked him up and took him over to the federal system. And sadly, Fat Frankie passed away too. Fat Frankie passed away, so that was sad for me to hear. I was there with Kozlowski, Dennis Kozlowski. He was the CEO of Tyco, who stole hundreds of millions of dollars. I was in Mid-State with him. We were in Mid-State together, and they built a whole wing for this guy in Mid-State. They kept him segregated as well. That's what they do for you when you got hundreds of millions of dollars. If you remember his case, they talked about him throwing like $1 million birthday party for his wife, and he had $6,000 shower curtains, and he flew in men from Greece to stand around and serve the hors d'oeuvres. He was crazy. He was a big guy, Dennis Kozlowski, tall, 6'3", 6'4", bald. I used to see him going to the package room to pick up fancy cigars. I never had a conversation with him, though, as well, though. I never saw him. He was always escorted by police. I mean, I never got to meet him, but I would see him. I see him in the prison. So I was with Kozlowski. I was with Frankie Baba. Frankie Baba. I was in Mid-Orange with Frankie Baba. I know some of the names are funny. These were gangsters, you know what I mean? Frankie Baba was involved in the Joe Gallo hit. When I met him, he had like fucking 30, 40 years in prison already. Was walking around with a cane. I don't think he was the trigger man in the hit, but he was involved in the hit. And he had like 40-something years in prison or close to it, Frankie. And so funny stories about him, that I won't get into. I'll tell you something, about all these men that I just mentioned. There's many more than that. I'm just taking you through a brief video of some of the high profile cases I was with. The thing to remember is that all these men that I just mentioned is you wouldn't know who they are if you met them. And you wouldn't even be able to tell how serious they were. Like, to give an example, Fat Frankie was in the Lucchese crime family, and he was a big shot. He made his way up through the ranks. I didn't know that until he told me, and I was with him every day. He was a funny guy too. He used to tell funny stories, make you laugh, and you'd look at Frankie and think there was nothing to him. You know what I mean? That he was just a regular guy, and dangerous individual, man. You'd look at Doc, the chiropractor. This guy chopped up his wife and put her in the freezer. You could spend every day with Doc. He was such a humble, quiet man. You would never know. You would never know with a majority. Some of them you could tell. Some of them, there were guys you knew you shouldn't play with, but a lot of them you wouldn't be able to tell. A few years back, my birthday was coming up, and We called it the felony barbecue, man. I invited a lot of guys to my house that I did time with, guys that I know, guys that I can trust, guys that. Let me explain something to you about prison. When you're in prison with a man and you're with him every day, and you're out in the prison yard with him, where there's a lot of danger, and where there's stabbings, and where there's cuttings, and where there's fights, and where there's murders, and where prison is segregated, and everybody's in their own group, you get to know the men who are around you. You get to know if they will be there in a tough situation. You get to know if they will run or hide, or you get to know if they will stand up and have your back. You learn this about the men around you. See, I didn't learn this about the guys that were my so-called friends before I was incarcerated. You thought these friends would be there no matter what. And then all of a sudden you get incarcerated and they vanish like they never knew you. I could give you a whole list of those pieces of shit. Guys that I would have done anything in the world for, that I considered my friends because I was a loyal guy. I was a street guy. You know what I mean? I wasn't perfect. We all make mistakes, especially when we're younger. But I was, I believed in doing anything for my friends. And these guys just vanished like I was dead. Well, when you go into prison, you know which guys are going to be there and which aren't. If there's a problem in the yard, and the room is going, there's going to be a problem in the yard tonight, and you see which guys don't show up, which guys don't come out to the yard, they stay in their cell. You know what I mean? And you see which guys show up and they say, we're here, don't worry about it, we got you. So I invited a bunch of those guys to the barbecue for my birthday, and my wife called it the felony barbecue. I had about 15 guys here that I was locked up with in different scenarios. My buddy Jimmy was here, my buddy Blue was here, my buddy Wood was here. A lot of the guys, some of the guys I mentioned were here at the barbecue. And they said with all those guys here, it was the safest neighborhood, believe it or not, because they were all here. These were serious, serious people. And I've kept in touch with quite a few of them, and spent time with quite a few of them. And there was quite a few of them that went bad as well. Guys that I thought sincerely changed and came home to get involved in the same shit. So I didn't have them around me anymore because it's just not my style and can't afford that. But there was, as I said, a lot of high profile guys there, a lot of cases there. You meet good dudes, you meet bad dudes, and that's just a little part of the guys I was exposed to up there, man. And so not a place you want to play around, because I said you never know. You meet half of these guys and you just never know. You guys take care, and don't forget to subscribe.